How about leap? Right? I'd like to see if there are some kids in the audience. Kids? Any kids in the audience? Children? Yes. I just spent a few days over at KAUST, the university on the west side of the kingdom, working with students here, Saudi students, and let me tell you, the kingdom is in good hands. The future is bright. These were some of the smartest kids I have ever encountered. I am astronaut Susan Kilrain, 2 times space shuttle pilot, one of only 3 women to ever pilot the space shuttle, and the youngest space shuttle pilot. I got my start as a little girl growing up in rural Georgia, and I am the unlikely astronaut. I went to some of the lousiest schools in the country. We had no money, and there were other obstacles along the way. But my dad used to take us to the airport to watch the airplanes take off and land, and I was mesmerized by airplanes. And I thought, I want to be a pilot one day. And I was laying out in the grass looking up at the stars one night and thought, I want to fly in space one day. Now, I didn't know of any women astronauts. In fact, the US didn't have women astronauts until much later. And I was very nervous when I approached my father and said, Dad, I want to be an astronaut when I grow up. And he said the most magical words, you can be anything you want to be. And I learned 2 things that day, to shoot for the stars and to encourage my own children that they can be anything they want to be. I was very fortunate. I won a contest when I was in high school that allowed me the opportunity to get my private pilot's license. And I was on my way. I went to university, Georgia Tech. I got my master's degree in aerospace engineering. I was working at the wind tunnel in Lockheed Corporation in Atlanta. And I wanted to be an astronaut, but I was bored as an engineer, and I thought, what am I going to do? I don't like sitting at a desk all day. Fortunately, my boss put me in touch with Dick Scobie, an astronaut, who recommended I join the military and become a test pilot. And that was the best way to become an astronaut. And I thought, this is perfect. I could be a pilot and go to space. So I went to the Air Force recruiter and knocked on their door. And they said, I'm sorry, we're not taking any more women pilots this year. That was the first time I had been told no because I was a woman. It was not the last time. And somebody said, why don't you go to the Navy? And I said, the Navy, they drive boats. And they said, they also have airplanes. I said, okay. So I went to the Navy and they accepted me. And it wasn't very long that I got my hair all cut off and I was marching around at AOCS getting yelled at by the drill instructor up there. And after 13 weeks, I was commissioned #1 in my class. And the part of that that made me so proud was 1/3 of my grade was a peer evaluation by the other candidates. And there were 59 men and me. And they voted me as #1 in the class. And that was a proud day for me. Thank you. I went off to flight school. Primary flight school was easy because I already had my private pilot's license. But then I started flying jets. And then I had to land on an aircraft carrier. And landing on a boat in the ocean is the scariest thing I've ever done. And remember, I've launched myself off into space on rockets. But landing on this boat really got my attention. But it worked out okay. You know, you don't have an instructor in your back seat because nobody's brave enough to go to the aircraft carrier with a student pilot that's never landed there before. So you're all by yourself. And then I went on to advanced flight school and landed on the aircraft carrier in the A4 and got my wings. And then it was the second time I was told no because I was a woman. The U.S. had a combat exclusion law where women were not allowed to fly combat aircraft, were not allowed to be stationed on aircraft carriers. And they said, well, you can fly a support mission. So I was flying a tactical airplane that was designed to drop bombs, but it wasn't doing that job. And I lived in Florida, and I did a support role. And I wanted to go to test pilot school, so I started applying. And my friend who had been to test pilot school took me up to the school and introduced me to the commanding officer. And the commanding officer looked at my record and said, wow, you have a really good record. However, the last woman we accepted here didn't do very well, and we're not willing to take that chance again. That was like getting hit on the head by a brick, like somebody I never even met. Her performance was affecting my ability to succeed. But in the Navy, as things are, commanding officers change regularly. And after 3 applications, a new commanding officer was in, and I was accepted to test pilot school. And I spent 1 year of the most rigorous academic and flying I had ever done. We were flying all kinds of airplanes we had never been in, taking precise data, using the calculus we had learned in college, and writing reports. And it was a solid year of this. And then one of the best things happened. The combat exclusion policy was ended. And I got to fly this airplane. How many of you have seen Top Gun? Yeah? It was on in my hotel last night. I'm wondering if they did that just for me. The F-14 Tomcat, many people know it from the movies. It's a lot of fun to fly. And when the combat exclusion law ended, they sent 2 women over to the West Coast, and they sent me over to the East Coast by myself to start training in this airplane. The men, most of them didn't want us there. Most of them didn't think we would be able to fly the plane. And I felt like I was being looked at under a microscope all the time. So the commanding officer said he's going to fly my first flight with me. He's in the back seat, no controls. And we head out over the ocean. We get about 100 kilometers off, and we have a hot oil temperature. I have to shut an engine down. The engines are far apart, so that causes a big yaw that I have to correct for. And then the hydraulic systems didn't cross over, so I'm half my hydraulics, half my engines. The weather comes in, I'm flying in the soup, I can't see where I am, have to fly on the instruments. He's in the back seat yelling at me because he can't do anything except yell at me because he doesn't have any controls. And I fly back to the field. I lower my arresting hook like I would if I was landing on a carrier, and it all worked out okay. I caught the wire at the field, shut down the engine, and in retrospect, it was the best thing that could have ever happened because now the whole squadron knew I could handle the airplane. In fact, the airplane doesn't know the gender of the person sitting in the seat. So then I interviewed for NASA. And the interview was about 6,000 people applied, and 120 were interviewed, and I got selected. I was still the unlikely astronaut. I was the youngest one applying. I was junior in the military. I never thought I would have been accepted, but I was. And off I went to NASA, flying the T-38 jet for our training and the shuttle training aircraft to practice those approaches. And 2 years after I got to NASA, it was time to launch into space on STS-83. I'm all suited up, ready to go. We head out. It's like one day of being a rock star. People are cheering. There's security helicopters overhead. And it's a beautiful day. The weather's good. The shuttle's working great. And we're going to launch into space. I often get asked, how do you feel when you're getting in and launching into space? Are you nervous? Are you scared? How does it feel? And I must say, I didn't have time to be nervous or scared. I was more worried that I was not going to do the procedures in the right order and the launch was going to scrub because of me. I had to start up the hydraulic systems, the electric systems. I had to make sure the engines were working properly. I was super busy. As the G-forces were increasing, it felt like an elephant had climbed on my chest as we're headed off into space. We're rocking and rolling and going faster than the speed of sound. And from the ground to orbit is only 8.5 minutes. And we're about 400 kilometers up where we orbit the Earth. But we had a problem. We had a major problem with one of our electrical systems. And Houston analyzed it for a day or so and decided we needed to shut that system down. And we had 3 systems on board, but now we're left with only 2. And we have only 2/3 our electrical power. We were safe. However, if we would have lost another electrical system, we would not have been able to safely come home to Earth. So they decided we needed to come home right away, which we did. Fortunately, they decided our science was too important not to do, and they launched us again 3 months later. And what they learned about that is when an astronaut flies the first time or after a year or so, we're queasy to our stomach. We can't work efficiently. It takes 2 or 3 days to really work at 100%. But when you fly astronauts 3 months apart, there is none of that. We were 100% on the first day, and we were able to complete our 16 days of science. We talk a lot about weightlessness. You see it on TV. You do float. It's hard to describe, kind of like being in a swimming pool without getting wet. But this is what we're working in. So if we want to do something like turn a screwdriver, we have to hold on to something in order to turn that screwdriver. Otherwise, it won't happen. Here, you can't be claustrophobic if you're going to go into space because you sleep in a tiny little box like this. But it's not very good sleeping anyway. Lots of good food in space. Some of it's fun. And sometimes we did little experiments to inspire children where we would let these balls of juice float maybe and blow them together so that you could show them about cohesion and what happens when the balls crash into each other. And kids get so excited, they're like, well, can you stick something in that ball of juice? And what happens if the juice hits the water? So we took little time to film things that could inspire kids of the future. Working in space is what we're there for, and all of the science we did was about making life here on Earth better. If you have an iPhone in your pocket, you have an alloy in that iPhone that we first created in space. It's that pink oval you see up there, the glassy alloys that are strong, yet still flexible. Now if you sit on your iPhone, it doesn't break in half. And that's what we were doing. We were making alloys so that they could test them and find out which ones could be useful. If you're a golfer, same thing. Golf clubs need to be flexible. We made little fires in space. Fire is dangerous in space, but ours were controlled. Looking for fuels that maybe don't pollute as much, don't produce as much soot, or ways to use the fuels. Taking advantage of the weightlessness. You can make alloys here on Earth. You can burn fires here, but on space, without the effects of gravity, you can make perfect alloys very quickly. You can burn fires without the hot air rising and affecting it. So we were able to make perfect crystals for protein crystal growth and for pharmaceutical applications, cures for diseases or vaccines. Astronauts go into space with only a handful of people, so you have to do lots of things. You need to be, I was the medical doctor, I was the photographer, the maintenance person, I was a trash collector, I got the computers to keep running. But I mostly miss my family. People often ask, what do you miss the most? I miss my family, I missed a good shower, and I miss some pizza. Now it's time to come home. The most dangerous time, I think, of the flight because you are now flying in a fireball. 2,000 to 3,000 degrees Celsius outside that shuttle. You see the big glow out the window. We are inside a fireball. In fact, this is the part, part of the flight where Columbia was lost because there was a little tiny pinhole in the leading edge of the wing, and that heat was able to get in and burn up the flight control systems. And I was in Columbia twice before this, so very fortunate. It's a dangerous time of the flight. And now we're coming into land. We have no engines. As a pilot, it's a glider. But the wings are really tiny, so it doesn't glide. So basically, it falls from the air like a rock, and you get one chance at the landing because you cannot add power, go around, try it again, or anything. So it is a very challenging vehicle to land. And then we're back down, giving a quick press conference, happy to be back on Earth. The view, I can't leave you here without showing you the view and talking about this future of space. So here we are, right? The whole Arabian Peninsula taken from STS-83, my first flight. I could always recognize the area because of the crop circles for the pivot point irrigation. How about this one? Riyadh at night. How beautiful, right? I think I missed over Jeddah, but anyways, maybe it comes. Here we are, Jeddah, in the daytime. I just spent a few days just north of there in coast. Medina from space. This dust storm was so impressive on my flight. It came all the way across the Arabian Peninsula, across the Red Sea, across all of northern Africa, across the Atlantic Ocean. I'm pretty sure there was dust from this storm on my car when I got home from space. Any of you from the UK? How about the Mediterranean Sea with Africa on the bottom and Europe on the top? It is so beautiful looking down at our Earth. I never got tired of looking out the window. Florida, Panama. How about the Hawaiian Islands? The Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia. Everybody recognizes Dubai with the islands. Italy, and of course the Greek Isles. Istanbul. How about this area? Egypt with the Nile River. And then we're going to zoom in on Cairo, and we're going to zoom in even further. Can you see the pyramids in the middle of the slide? There's so much to see and such a beautiful world to glance down at. We saw 7 active volcanoes and a sunrise or sunset every 45 minutes because we're going around the world in 90 minutes. So sunsets and sunrises are spectacular, but they only last 9 seconds from start to finish. All right, today we have the International Space Station. It has been over 20 years since all of mankind was standing on Earth. We've had people in space continuously for over 20 years. Lots of countries are in collaboration. This is the inside with lots of wires and stuff everywhere. We can get up there with the Russian Soyuz. I understand that the first Saudi woman's going to space soon. How about that? I think we're about to increase the number of Saudis that have been into space to the number 3 very shortly, and hopefully it will continue. We can get up there with the SpaceX Dragon, and I think this is one of the greatest technologies of the decade, is landing that booster on a platform in the middle of the ocean. How cool is that? Boeing's Starliner is also going to take people to the space station. China has 3 of its astronauts on orbit in their own space station. And NASA has launched Artemis 1 and gearing up for Artemis 2. Artemis 1 was uncrewed. Artemis 2 will be crewed but not land on the moon, and Artemis 3 will land on the moon. The SLS rocket will get them there. And you see the profile of Artemis 1, how it went off to the moon and beyond. Past the moon, and look at Earth and moon together. You know, it shows you when you're going to head off to Mars, you're going to lose sight of the Earth completely. There's a mini space race going on now between SpaceX and NASA, both wanting to go to the moon and perhaps other countries as well. Going to colonize, put a habitat there, build a colony in preparation for taking that technology onto Mars. There are a few challenges, and if there are some of the startups in the room, I think we're working on some, especially the fuels. The space fuels, rocket fuel needs to improve if we want to go to Mars quicker or go further out of our solar system. But why? Why go? What's the benefit? Well, the technology for one. But for me, the biggest reason we do missions like the Apollo missions back in the 60s and 70s and the Artemis missions now is to inspire the children, to inspire our young people. They want to be astronauts. At KAUST, over half of the kids in the audience wanted to be astronauts. And these kids, they may go on to be astronauts or they may not, but they will go into STEM fields and they will create amazing things. The James Webb Telescope recently launched, and look how beautiful the universe is. The double asteroid redirection test crashed into an asteroid and redirected it just enough to avoid coming to Earth. This was just a test, it wasn't real, but what if someday? And my favorite photo from Earth, and the one that speaks to me the most, is this one that shows how thin the atmosphere is, how fragile it is, and how we, all of us, all of mankind, need to protect our planet and preserve that atmosphere, because that's all that's keeping us alive. I am the unlikely astronaut. I take my job as an inspiration to young people and a mentor to young people, especially young women, very seriously. And I love the opportunity to speak with all of you today. Thank you.